Rain hissed against the glass corridors of Halcyon Prism, washing the city in silver haze. The floating metropolis shimmered like a mirage above the endless sea, its curved towers glistening under the stormlight. From a distance, it looked clean perfect, even but up close. The walls sweated humidity, and the vents exhaled air that smelled faintly of rust and disinfectant. Cade Marin moved through that damp quiet, a tall figure in a gray maintenance coat, his steps measured and soundless on the translucent floors. The hum of the turbines beneath his feet vibrated through the soles of his boots, a low, constant rhythm like a heartbeat he had long ago learned to trust more than people. His shift had run late again. Another set of filters clogged, another sensor array failing to meet oxygen balance. He'd spent the last hour elbow deep in a vent conduit, trying to make a machine breathe the way humans were supposed to. When the last indicator light blinked green, he closed the panel and exhaled, the faint hiss mingling with the rain outside. All he wanted was to get back to his quarters, strip off the wet coat, and let the silence settle in. He lived on the city's upper decks, where the light was softer and the air supposedly cleaner. Supposedly. Cade locked the door behind him, unfastened the collar of his coat, and rubbed the tension from his neck. The apartment was small, built for efficiency rather than comfort. Just glass and soft light, and the faint murmur of the climate system overhead. He had learned to like the stillness machines didn't lie. They just failed in predictable ways. He reached for the lights, and that's when he heard it. 3 chime tones at the door, uneven, stuttering, not the clean synthetic ring of a scheduled visitor. Cade froze for the length of a single breath. Habit made his pulse slow, his senses narrow. When you've spent years in war zones, you don't ignore irregular sounds. He stepped to the panel and opened the door. A small figure stood in the corridor, drenched from head to toe, white hair plastered to a pale blue face. Her eyes were wide and luminous, and her hands trembled as they clutched a crushed paper sachet leaking purple juice. "Please," she whispered, her voice a shiver. "My mom can't breathe." Cade's brain moved faster than thought diagnostic reflex overriding hesitation. He grabbed his medkit from the rack beside the door, snapped the seal shut, and crouched to her level. "Show me," he said. The girl turned and ran, sandals slapping the wet floor, and Cade followed. The corridor lights strobed as the ventilation mist rolled through, fogging the air. They passed doors sealed tight, windows clouded from the inside, and the faint metallic smell of sterilizer grew stronger. At the far end of the hall, under a vent grill flickering pale blue light, a woman slumped against the wall. Her skin shared the girl's hue, but deeper blue like deep water rather than ice. Her clothes were soaked, her lips tinged gray, her breath sharp and ragged like air scraping through glass shards. Cade dropped beside her, one knee hitting the floor, and unlatched his kit in a motion too practiced to be anything but muscle memory. "Name?" he asked. "Neely," she rasped, barely audible. Her voice whistled through her throat as she tried to speak again, then coughed, a dry, high sound that made the girl flinch. "I'm Cade," he said, pulling out a small mask and fitting the oxygen valve. "You can breathe if you stay calm, slow, and through your mouth." He attached the seal and started the flow. The faint hiss filled the narrow space. The girl knelt beside her mother, tears streaking through the rain on her cheeks. Cade watched the numbers flicker on his wrist: scanner oxygen saturation low, bronchial constriction severe. He frowned, scanning the vent above them. A faint glitter hung in the mist like dust catching light. He held his breath, lifted his scanner, and let the beam cut through the air. The reading made his gut tighten. Microcrystalline particles sterilizer residue, the same kind used in cheap air systems that should never have been installed in residential decks. He'd seen this once before, off-world. It coated lungs like frost, turning breath into pain. He turned back to the woman, adjusting the serum ratio in the nebulizer. "You're going to feel a burn," he said quietly. "It means it's working." She nodded weakly, trusting him because she had no other choice. The serum hissed through the mask. She gasped, choked, then coughed again, a wet sound this time. Cade kept one steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her, counting her breaths until they slowed from frantic to steady. The blue of her lips soft to something close to normal. The girl, Mary, exhaled like she'd been holding air since she knocked on his door. Cade turned off the mask and leaned back on his heels. "She'll be all right for now," he said. "But that vent's poison. You don't go near it again." Neely looked up at him, eyes bright with exhaustion and disbelief. "Why would they?" He cut her off gently. "Because it's cheaper." He packed his kit and stood, his voice flat but steady. "You're both coming with me? I have clean air." When she tried to protest, he lifted her effortlessly, the way medics do when someone's too light to argue. Mary followed close behind, silent except for the soft patter of her feet on the glass floor. Behind them, the vent continued to hum, spilling invisible death into the corridor, its sound blending with the city's endless mechanical breathing. Cade didn't look back. He had heard that sound too many times before, the kind that meant someone had decided life was an acceptable cost of efficiency. This time, he wasn't walking away. The storm lingered long after dawn, veiling Halcyon Prism in fog, thick enough to blur the skyline. Cade stood by the narrow window of his apartment, mug in hand, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The city beyond looked like a dream someone hadn't finished building, its towers half lost in vapor, its lights dim and trembling. The turbines below thrummed softly, steady as breath. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and antiseptic. The room was warm now, clean. On the small bench beneath the window, Neely lay wrapped in a thin blanket, her breathing slow but steady, each rise and fall proof she was still alive. Her daughter, Mary, slept curled beside her, one hand tangled in her mother's hair. Cade set the mug down and checked the air monitor again. Oxygen stable. Particulate count 0. For now, the danger had been cut off. But the data on his wrist scanner told a harder truth. The contamination wasn't an accident. The microcrystals he'd found in Neely's blood carried a synthetic compound used in sterilizer, resin manufactured by Eric's Environmental Services. He'd replaced enough filters to recognize their pattern. Cheap polymer base, recycled mesh, the kind corporate boards loved because it saved 17% in energy costs. 17% that could kill people like her. He rubbed his temple, trying to chase the anger into something useful. The soldier in him had learned long ago that fury was a waste unless directed. He wasn't supposed to be doing this anymore. His contract here was simple maintenance, inspections, no heroics. But after last night, that line had dissolved. A faint sound pulled him from thought. Neely stirred, eyelids fluttering open, the silver white of her irises catching the morning light. She blinked, disoriented, and focused on him. "You stayed up," she murmured, voice still rasping. Cade gave a short nod. "Old habit? Is it morning?" "Technically," he said, glancing at the filtered light through the glass. "The system calls it that." She sat up slowly, every movement careful, like testing her body's memory. Her breathing still sounded rough, but not brittle anymore. "Mary?" she asked. Still sleeping. He turned back to her scanner readings. "She's fine. You both are, for now." "For now?" Neely's tone carried quiet fear. Cade looked up, meeting her eyes. "You were breathing microcrystal dust. It's from a defective sterilizer filter. Shouldn't exist on this deck." Her gaze hardened, as if the words clicked somewhere inside her memory. They moved us 2 weeks ago. Said the shelter wing was closing. Promised the atrium was cleaner. Cade snorted softly. Cleaner air doesn't mean safer. Just cheaper to maintain. She frowned. You knew about this? I filed a complaint last month, he admitted, turning the mug in his hands. No one answered. Silence stretched between them. Only the low hiss of the vents filled the room. Then people will keep getting sick, she said finally, voice low but steady. They already are. He picked up his datapad and flicked through old logs. See this serial number? That's your building's filter batch. It was supposed to be replaced with the updated resin mesh. Instead, someone swapped it for recycled stock. Why? Because it looks the same on a scan. No one notices until they can't breathe. Her hands tightened on the blanket. You said you're a medic? Was, Cade corrected. Frontier Corps, long time ago. Then you know what happens if it spreads. He nodded once. That's why I'm going to trace the shipment back. Neely hesitated, then leaned forward. You'll be arrested if they catch you tampering with cooperative equipment. Not if I find something they don't want found first. He set the mug down, the faint clink echoing through the room. You said the relocation orders came from the cooperative. A man in a gray sash, she answered. Name tag said Inspector Veng. He said our transfer was mandatory. Cade's expression darkened. He remembered the name from the maintenance reports. Vin's authorization code was on the filter replacement request. He knew, Cade muttered. Either he's covering for Eric's, or he's part of it. Neely looked at him, her exhaustion giving way to a flicker of hope and fear mixed together. You're going after him? After the truth, Cade said quietly. He's just the first link. For a long time, Neely said nothing. She watched the rain slide down the glass, her reflection ghosted in the pane beside his. I don't understand you, she said finally. You don't even know us. I don't need to, Cade replied. You knocked on my door. That's enough. The simplicity of his answer disarmed her more than any speech could have. She lowered her eyes, fingers tracing the edge of the blanket. People don't help without reason, she whispered. Not here. Cade's voice was calm. I used to think that too. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the kind that builds trust in small, invisible increments. Outside, the turbines hummed like distant thunder. Neely drew a deeper breath, her lungs no longer catching, and for the first time since the night before, she didn't look like someone fighting for air. Mary stirred, half awake, blinking through a mess of white hair. She smiled sleepily when she saw her mother sitting up. You're better, she mumbled, her voice soft. Neely smiled faintly, brushing the child's cheek. Thanks to him. Mary turned her gaze to Cade. Are we safe now? Cade hesitated before answering. You're safe here, he said. But the city isn't. He stood, slipping on his coat, his movements deliberate. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Where are you going? Neely asked. Cade opened the small maintenance cabinet and retrieved his toolkit. To find out who's poisoning the air we breathe. He paused at the threshold, looking back at them. Lock the door after me. When it sealed behind him, the sound of the lock clicking was swallowed by the hum of the city. Neely sat in silence, Mary nestled against her side, both staring at the door as if listening to the echo of his footsteps fading into the mist. And somewhere in the glass veins of Halcyon Prism, air still hissed through the ducts carrying secrets that no one was supposed to notice until it was too late. The lower decks of Halcyon Prism were never meant to be seen by the people who lived above them. Cade descended through the maintenance shafts, the air growing colder and thicker with every level. The hum of turbines echoed through the metal corridors, rhythmic and deep, like the sound of a sleeping creature breathing beneath the city. Light leaked from cracked panels in narrow streaks, painting the steel walls in trembling ribbons of white. He moved quietly, his boots clanging once, twice, then steady again. The smell changed down here: oil, rust, and the faint acrid sting of sterilizer gas. It reminded him of the war, of bunkers where air was a privilege and silence meant survival. He hated how easily his body remembered. His scanner blinked on his wrist, picking up trace readings from the vents ahead: fine crystalline particulates, the same he'd found in Neely's lungs. Cade followed the trail, passing beneath pipes that dripped condensation onto his shoulders. The corridors grew tighter, filled with low mechanical growls from the filtration engines. He reached a sealed hatch stamped with the red insignia of Eric's Environmental Services. Authorized personnel only. The irony of that phrase made him grin without humor. He slid his maintenance card through the reader. Denied. He tried again, bypassing the system through his wrist tool. The light flickered from red to green. Not authorized enough, he muttered, and pushed the hatch open. Inside, the maintenance bay stretched wide and dim, filled with stacked filter cartridges, sealed drums, and crates stamped with serial codes. His breath caught. The crates weren't supposed to be here. These models were obsolete, recalled 2 years ago, after microcrystal contamination had been linked to colony deaths on the outer rim. Eric's had promised destruction of every unit. Cade crouched, prying open a crate. The filters inside gleamed faintly under his scanner's blue beam, crystalline dust glittering like frost. He scraped a sample into a tube, the fine particles dancing in the air like broken stars. "You bastards," he whispered. The sound of a vent fan kicked on behind him, making him freeze. Footsteps followed. Cade turned slowly, his hand hovering near the multi-tool clipped to his belt. A man stood in the doorway, tall, clean uniform, gray sash across his chest, the same insignia Neely had described. Inspector Veng. His face was smooth, polite, but his eyes were sharp. "Mr. Marin," Veng said, voice calm, almost conversational. "You shouldn't be here." Cade straightened, but didn't move away from the crate. "Maintenance review. System flagged contamination. I'm investigating. Without authorization?" Vin's tone held mild amusement. "That's risky, especially for someone already under suspension review." Cade's jaw tightened. "You can file a report. After I finish." Feng stepped further in, hands clasped behind his back. "You're wasting your time. The filters are functioning within safety parameters." "Then you should probably take a closer look," Cade said, tossing him the sample tube. Veng caught it reflexively, frowning at the glittering residue inside. "Microcrystals," Cade said flatly. "You know what that means." "Speculation," Veng replied, slipping the tube into his pocket. "You have no context for that material." Cade took a slow step closer. "I have context. I've seen lungs collapse from this stuff. It coats the bronchia like glass." Vin's expression stayed unreadable. "You're out of your depth, Mr. Marin. Leave the air to those who understand it. People are dying." "And you think you can fix it?" Vin's voice sharpened now, like a blade hidden in velvet. "Do you have any idea what happens if the system you're standing in shuts down?" "The city falls. Millions choke before the backups engage. Your crusade doesn't save lives, it destabilizes them." Cade met his gaze. "That's what they said on Jared 9, right before the colony suffocated." For the first time, Vin's composure flickered. Just a blink. Cade saw it. "You're not the first inspector I've dealt with," he said. "You're just the latest liar." Vin's lips thinned. "You're making a mistake." "Probably," Cade said, turning back toward the crates. "But I'll sleep fine if it means someone else wakes up breathing." Veng hesitated, then sighed, the sound heavy, almost weary. If you won't stop, at least be smart enough to disappear. They won't come for me, Marin. They'll come for you. He turned to leave, his voice echoing down the corridor. You breathe the same air as everyone else. Remember that. Cade watched him go until the sound of his boots faded. He didn't know if that was a warning or a threat. Maybe both. Either way, he didn't care. He scanned the crates again, recording serial numbers, storage tags, and shipment codes. His wrist display traced the distribution path. Every batch of these defective filters had been rerouted from the same supply hub under the East Aeroponics District, exactly where Neely had lived. The pattern was too neat, too deliberate. Someone was targeting the lower blocks. Cade sealed his samples, powered down his scanner, and closed the hatch behind him. As he climbed the maintenance ladder back toward the upper decks, the noise of the turbines followed him, louder now, like the city itself was breathing wrong. When he emerged into the residential corridor again, the air felt heavier, the mist thicker. Through the fogged glass, he could just make out the faint silhouettes of two figures near his apartment door. His pulse jumped. One small, one tall. The child saw him first. Mary broke into a run, hair streaming behind her, voice small but sharp. He came back. Behind her, Neely waited, eyes wide, relief etched across her face. Cade knelt as Mary threw her arms around him. He looked past her to Neely, and for a moment, the exhaustion in his body lifted. You shouldn't be out here, he said quietly. You shouldn't be alone, she replied. Her tone was soft but unyielding. Cade met her gaze, a flicker of respect crossing his own. Maybe she was right. Maybe no one should have to fight for air alone. He opened the door, motioning them both inside, already feeling the weight of the city pressing closer around them. The vents hummed overhead, steady and relentless, like a warning neither of them wanted to hear. Cade's apartment felt smaller that night, the walls humming with the steady pulse of the air systems. The light filtering through the glass panels had gone dull and amber, the storm outside reduced to a whispering drizzle that ran in slow rivers down the windows. Neely sat at the small table, her hands folded tight around a steaming mug of synth tea he'd brewed from the last of his rations. Mary was asleep again on the bench by the wall, her breathing even soft. Cade moved around the room with deliberate, quiet, sealing vents, checking the filters he'd modified himself, and scanning for traces of residue. Each reading came back clean. For now, the city above them had gone still, too still. It was the kind of quiet he recognized from field operations, the breath before the alarms. He caught his reflection in the window. A man too used to surviving systems that shouldn't exist. You found something, didn't you? Neely's voice broke the silence. Cade glanced over his shoulder. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharper now, awake with something between fear and defiance. I found enough, he said. Crates of recalled filters in the maintenance decks. Old Eric's stock. Someone's reusing them to cut costs. You have proof? Working on it. He sat across from her, sliding his data slate onto the table. Serial logs flickered across the display shipment codes, timestamps, maintenance records. She leaned in closer, scanning the lines of green text. You're not supposed to have access to these, she said. That makes two of us, he replied. He keyed open a map of the city's air grid, a complex network of arteries glowing across the holographic projection. Every contaminated shipment routes through one distribution node under East Aeroponics. It's how they hide the duplicates. Neely frowned, pointing to one flickering section. That's a public archive terminal. It syncs with the cooperative registry. Cade nodded. Exactly. If I can upload this data there, it becomes visible to every engineer on the block. The cooperative can't bury it without triggering a public trace. And if they find out? And I lose my job? Maybe worse. You'll lose more than that, she said quietly. They'll come for you. Cade leaned back, expression unreadable. They always do. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It hummed, alive, tense. He caught the faint shimmer of her skin under the lamplight, pale blue, turned almost silver by exhaustion. Why do you care? She asked suddenly. Cade looked up from the slate. Because breathing shouldn't be a privilege. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded as if that answer meant more than he realized. Then I'll help. He frowned. You shouldn't be involved. I already am. You said the data syncs to the public terminals. I used to work in the registry office before they shut down the hybrid programs. I can still get into the archive network. Cade studied her for a moment, the kind of measuring silence he used on the battlefield before deciding to trust someone. You sure? You saved my life, she said simply. Let me save the rest of them. Before he could respond, the door chime buzzed once, and again, slow and deliberate. Cade's muscles tensed. Neely froze. Stay here, he whispered, standing. The sound came again. He approached the door panel and glanced at the feed. A man in a gray sash stood outside, rain dripping from his coat. Inspector Veng. Cade exhaled slowly and hit the release. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Mr. Marin, Veng greeted politely, though his tone carried steel under the courtesy. We need to talk. Cade leaned against the frame, blocking the view inside. We already did. You were seen accessing restricted maintenance levels, Veng said, smile thin as wire. That's a violation of cooperative protocol. Maybe you should check your vents before worrying about mine, Cade replied evenly. The filters you approved are killing people. Vin's eyes flicked, just once, toward the interior. You've got unregistered occupants. Cade didn't blink. You've got bigger problems. The pause stretched, air thickening between them. Vin's tone softened, dangerously calm. I'm giving you one chance. Walk away. Destroy what you found. No. You think the council cares about the lower decks? Vin's voice cracked just slightly, a note of something close to desperation. You expose this, and they'll bury it under false reports before morning. But they'll bury you too. Cade's gaze didn't move. Then they can try. He stepped forward, close enough for the inspector to see the exhaustion that had burned down into resolve. If this city can't survive the truth, maybe it doesn't deserve the air it breathes. Vin's jaw tightened. He hesitated, then turned without another word. You don't know what you've started, he said over his shoulder before disappearing down the corridor. Cade waited until his footsteps faded before sealing the door. When he turned, Neely was standing behind him, eyes wide. You just threatened a cooperative official. I corrected his focus, Cade said, voice calm. Now we have to move fast. He grabbed his coat and the data drive, sliding them into his satchel. We upload tonight. Neely nodded, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. Where? Public Archive, Level 9. She moved toward the bench, brushing a hand over Mary's hair. The child stirred, but didn't wake. She be safe here? For a while. Cade hesitated, then reached into his medkit, pulling out a small portable air sensor. He set it beside the girl. If this flashes red, seal the vents and wait for me. Understand? Neely nodded. Let's go. They slipped out into the corridor, the air cool and heavy with mist. The city was quieter than usual, only the distant hum of turbines breaking the stillness. The walk to the archive took them through bridges of glass suspended above the sea. Below, lights rippled in the water, distorted reflections of a city built to look like perfection. Cade could almost hear the lie in it. You ever think about leaving? Neely asked quietly as they crossed. Every day, he said. But the trouble follows. It always does. When they reached the public archive, its wide chamber glowed pale blue, filled with transparent data pods lining the walls like lanterns. Only a few workers remained, half asleep at their terminals. Cade guided Neely to a pod in the corner. You'll have to override the system manually. She nodded, sliding her civic badge into the reader. It blinked once, hesitated, then turned green. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, bypassing security layers with the ease of someone who used to belong here. Cade inserted the drive. Streams of data filled the pod's display logs, shipment orders, falsified invoices. The progress bar began to climb. It's working, Neely whispered. Keep it steady, Cade said. Once it hits full sync, every terminal in the cooperative will mirror it. The upload reached 78% before the pod flickered. Warning, external override detected. Neely's eyes widened. They're blocking the feed. Cade's pulse spiked. Pull the drive. She yanked it free, just as the lights dimmed across the chamber. Voices echoed from the hall footsteps, then the sharp metallic click of enforcers' boots. Cade grabbed her arm. Move. They slipped through the side exit, running down a maintenance corridor as alarms began to wail through the building. The mist outside had thickened again, curling through the streets like smoke. They ran until their lungs burned, until the sound of the alarms became part of the rain. When they finally stopped in the shadow of a vent tower, both were breathing hard. Neely clutched the drive to her chest, trembling. Did we lose them? Not for long, Cade said, listening to the echo of pursuit in the distance. But we have what we need. He looked at her then, truly looked at the exhaustion and fire still burning behind her eyes. We finish this tomorrow. Tomorrow? She asked, incredulous. You really think we'll get another chance? Cade turned his face to the sky, where faint light flickered through the rain. We'll make one, he said. No one gets to suffocate quietly anymore. Dawn crawled over Halcyon Prism in muted shades of silver and pale blue. The storm finally spent, leaving the city wrapped in a heavy stillness that felt unnatural. Cade woke before the light reached his window, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, boots already on, mind already running. The apartment was dim, except for the soft hum of the air vents and the faint sound of Neely moving in the kitchen alcove. She was quiet, careful not to wake Mary, who still slept curled beneath the thin blanket on the bench. Her white hair spilled like spilled moonlight across her mother's jacket. Cade rose, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders, and joined Neely by the counter. She was fastening a scarf around her neck, her movements precise but tense. You didn't sleep, he said. She glanced at him once. Neither did you. Old habits, he muttered. The silence between them held more understanding than words ever could. The events of the night before the alarms, the chase, the aborted upload lingered in both their minds, heavy as unspent breath. The data drive sat on the table between them, small, innocuous, but more dangerous than any weapon he'd ever carried. He picked it up, turning it in his hand. This is it, he said. Proof of what they've been hiding. Shipments rerouted, falsified reports, reissued sterilizers. If we can get this into the atmospheric data core, it'll hit every civic registry at once. They won't be able to suppress it. Neely studied him, her face calm but eyes alive. That's the cooperative's headquarters. You're talking about breaking into the spine of the city. Walking in, he corrected, sliding the drive into his jacket pocket. If we move during the maintenance cycle, half their systems are in reset. No one will be watching the internal channels. You're sure? He almost smiled. Never. She didn't look away. Then I'm coming with you. He opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. You need me. I still know the registry systems. They were built on hybrid tech. My access codes might still ping green for a few seconds before they flag me. That's all the time you'll get. Cade met her gaze. You realize what happens if they catch you. I've already been erased once, she said softly. I won't vanish quietly again. For a moment, he saw something in her expression that reminded him of the soldiers he'd served, the quiet resolve of people who had nothing left to lose but their dignity. He nodded once. Then we go at first light. Neely exhaled, steadying herself. What about Mary? She stays here, Cade said. The room's sealed. She'll have clean air and the scanner. She's safer than we will be. Neely looked toward the sleeping child, her expression softening. She's stronger than she looks. Takes after her mother, Cade said quietly. Neely's lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile. You talk like you've done this before. Breaking into places? No, she said, eyes lifting to meet his. Saving people who don't want to be saved. Cade didn't answer. He didn't need to. He turned to his desk, checking his gear portable scanner. Old Federation badge with a dormant ID chip, compact coil disruptor. The tools of a man who'd sworn to never fight again, laid out like ghosts of another life. By the time they were ready to leave, the city's morning light had begun to seep through the mist, pale and cold. Cade bent beside Mary's bench, placing the scanner in her small hands. She stirred, blinking up at him sleepily. You're leaving? She whispered. Just for a little while, he said. You'll stay here. Watch the light. If this flashes red, you hide under the table until I come back. Promise? She nodded, clutching the device like a charm. You promise you'll come back? Cade hesitated, then touched her shoulder. I don't make promises I can't keep, he said. So yes, I will. She smiled faintly, half asleep. You sound like the old guards from the stories. Cade rose, his chest tightening in a way that felt unfamiliar. Neely kissed Mary's forehead, murmuring something in her native tongue before pulling up her hood. Let's go, she said. They slipped into the corridor, moving through the dawn haze. The upper decks of Halcyon Prism were quieter than usual. No vendors yet, no patrols, just the faint mechanical sigh of the city breathing through its lungs of steel and glass. They took the maintenance bridge that arched over the lower levels, mist swirling beneath like drifting smoke. Below, the sea glimmered faintly through breaks in the fog, an endless surface of turquoise steel. Cade walked in silence, his steps measured. If we get caught, Neely began, what happens to her? You'll get her out before they reach you, he said. She stopped, turning to him. That's not what I asked. He looked at her, and for once, his eyes softened. Then I'll make sure she never breathes dirty air again. That wasn't reassurance, and they both knew it. It was a vow. The civic tower loomed ahead, pale and monolithic, its spire piercing the fog. The entrance plaza was empty, except for 2 attendants scanning ID cards. Neely pulled her old civic badge from her pocket, the edges worn but still intact. I thought you said it was expired, Cade murmured. Old, she corrected. Not useless. The scanner beeped once, hesitated, then flashed green. They stepped through. Inside, the air was unnaturally sterile, almost flavorless. The hall was lined with mirrored walls and pale blue lights that made everything, including them, look clean, purified, and false. They kept walking, blending in with early maintenance staff. The data core's 3 levels down, Neely whispered. Admin lifts are locked to biometrics, but the service shaft still runs manual. Cade followed her lead through a side corridor marked authorized personnel only. The shaft was narrow and dark, vibrating faintly from the turbines. They climbed in silence, the metallic rungs cold beneath their hands. At level 22, Neely stopped. "This is it," she whispered. Cade pried open the hatch and peered through. The corridor beyond was empty, its floor gleaming under sterile light. They slipped out, soundless. The data core chamber was smaller than Cade had imagined, a circular room, centered around a transparent pillar pulsing with light. Rows of conduits spiraled upward, carrying information in luminous veins through the tower. The air hummed, alive, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Neely stepped to the console, her fingers trembling for only a moment before she began to type. Cade inserted the drive. Lines of code flared to life on the screen: purchase logs, maintenance schedules, falsified contracts, all streaming upward. The progress bar crawled past 60%, 70-90. Warning, data integrity conflict detected. "They're trying to block it again," Neely said, her voice tight. Cade drew his disruptor, eyes fixed on the corridor. "Keep going." The hum deepened, alarms starting to pulse faintly overhead. Neely's hands flew across the keys. Almost there. A voice echoed from behind them. Calm, too calm. "Mr. Marin." Cade turned slowly. Inspector Vang stood in the doorway. No guards this time, only the look of a man whose certainty had begun to fracture. "I should have known you'd come here," he said quietly. "You don't understand what you're doing." Cade took a step forward, disruptor low. "Enlighten me." Vang exhaled, setting a data slate on the floor like an offering. "You think I wanted this?" he asked. "You think anyone does? Eric's funds half of Halcyon Prism's infrastructure. Without them, the turbines stop. The air fails. This city falls out of the sky. You expose this, you destroy it." Neely turned from the console, fury in her voice. "So we just die quietly? So you can keep breathing clean air?" Vin's gaze flicked to her, and for the first time, his composure cracked. "You think you're saving lives," he said. "You're condemning them." Cade stepped closer. "I've heard that before from every coward who hid behind a system." The terminal beeped once. Upload complete. Vang froze. His face drained of color. "What did you?" Cade pocketed the drive. "Set it free." Red alarms flooded the chamber, washing the walls in warning light. Vin's voice rose above the noise, desperate now. "You've doomed us all." Cade's tone stayed steady. "No, just the ones who deserve it." He grabbed Neely's hand. "Move." They ran as the klaxons blared, boots striking metal, breath ragged but alive. Behind them, the data core pulsed brighter, its circuits bleeding light into every conduit in the tower. The truth was already in the air, impossible to take back. And for the first time since he'd come to Halcyon Prism, Cade realized the city was finally breathing for real loud. Uneven and alive. The alarms faded by the next sunrise, swallowed by the drone of turbines struggling to recalibrate. For the first time in years, the city's air smelled different, no longer sterile, no longer metallic. It carried something raw and alive. Moisture, dust, the faint tongue of salt that drifted up from the sea below. Cade stood at the edge of a shattered skybridge, the glass under his boots cracked but holding, the horizon bleeding silver light through thinning fog. He watched as Halcyon Prism trembled in the distance, its once perfect glow now fractured into 1,000 flickering veins of color. The truth had reached every system, every household terminal, every sealed apartment. He'd seen the feed before cutting his transmitter. Eric's environmental exposed for falsifying filter data. Civic officials under investigation, and Vin's pale face on every screen, announcing temporary containment measures that fooled no one. But Cade wasn't thinking about the politics. He was thinking about the air, how it moved now, uneven, imperfect, but honest. The city was finally exhaling, He adjusted the strap of his satchel and started walking. His ribs still ached from the sprint through the Corps' blast corridor. The Council's guards had sealed most of the exits, but he and Neely had slipped out through an old water reclamation shaft that smelled of algae and rust. They'd emerged half a kilometer south of the Civic Tower, coughing, drenched, and alive. He hadn't let go of her hand until the alarms dulled into memory. Now, hours later, he stood in the open, wind against his face, watching as emergency drones drifted like silent insects over the damaged districts. A soft cough drew his attention. Neely approached from behind, wrapped in Cade's spare coat, her pale hair whipped by the breeze. She looked stronger, her movements less fragile, though her voice still carried that rasp of healing. "It's spreading," she said, nodding toward the skyline. "Every deck's talking about it." "They know." Cade gave a small nod. "Good. Let them choke on their silence for once." Nilly's eyes flicked toward the sea below. "Vin's gone," she said. "They say he locked himself in the control decks. Some think he's trying to stabilize the systems. Others—" She hesitated. "Others think he's erasing evidence." Cade's jaw tightened. "He's doing both." He crouched beside the bridge rail, resting a hand against the glass. It vibrated faintly beneath his fingers' air pressure flux from the system resets. "The filters will fail in a day or two," he said. "They'll have to rebuild from scratch. Can they?" Neely asked. Cade's answer came after a long silence. "They'll have to learn how to breathe without control first." For a while, they said nothing. The city loomed around them like a wounded giant, coughing steam through its vents. Below, the ocean reflected the wreckage of its beauty, broken but shimmering. When Neely finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Mary asked if you were coming back." Cade turned his head, and for the first time that morning, he smiled. "She's too smart for her own good. She said you promised." "Then I guess I don't have a choice." He straightened, dusting off his hands. "Let's go home." They walked through corridors that no longer looked perfect. Lights flickered. Doors hung crooked on their frames. People stood in clusters, whispering over holofeeds that replayed Cade's broadcast, the data cascade, the exposed records, the proof of decades of cover-up. Some turned away when they saw him. Others nodded in quiet gratitude. No one stopped him. Fear had shifted into something heavier understanding. By the time they reached his apartment deck, the air smelled faintly of ozone and rain. The door's lock had been forced open, but inside was quiet. Mary sat on the floor beside the sealed vent, clutching the air scanner he'd left her. When she saw them, she scrambled up and ran into Nilly's arms. The device in her hand blinked green. "You came back," she said, muffled against her mother's coat. "Told you I would," Cade said, kneeling beside her. "You did good." She held up the scanner proudly. "It never turned red. That's because you're braver than this city." She grinned at that, the kind of pure, small smile that didn't belong in a place built on fear. Neely sat on the bench, drawing Mary close. Cade leaned against the wall, exhaustion sinking into his bones. For the first time in what felt like forever, he let himself breathe, not shallow, but deep. The air was still heavy with traces of ash and vapor, but it was real. It felt earned. A faint ping sounded from his wrist slate. He frowned and tapped it open. The data feed he'd uploaded had fragmented one file, previously encrypted, had auto-decrypted after the system sync. It bore a tag he hadn't seen in years, FR-7B, Frontier Corps Bio-Air Division. Cade's throat went dry. He opened the file. The text unfolded across his display technical readouts, prototype logs, and a project name, Resin Glass Hybrid Purification Membrane. Development origin, Frontier Corps, Warrior 12. Lead engineer, Captain Cade Marin. The world seemed to tilt. His breath caught. He scrolled down, reading his own archive signature beneath the design spec. He had built the filtration resin, the very formula Eric's had stolen, weaponized, and diluted. The microcrystals killing the lower decks were born from his own wartime invention, never meant for civilians, never meant to last this long. The air that poisoned them had his fingerprints embedded in its molecular lattice. Neely saw his face pale and stepped closer. "What is it?" she asked. Cade turned the slate so she could see. Her expression shifted slowly from confusion to realization to something deeper, sadder. "You made it," she whispered. "The filters." "Not like this," he said hoarsely. "It was supposed to clean fallout in war zones." "It wasn't?" He stopped, voice breaking. "I thought it was buried with the others." "I didn't know." She studied him for a long moment, her breath trembling. Then she reached out and took his hand. "Then you just made it right." Her words were quiet, without judgment, but they landed heavier than any accusation. Cade looked down at their joined hands, her smaller, blue-tinted fingers warm against his. He exhaled slowly, the sound catching somewhere between relief and grief. Outside, the city's turbines began to stabilize, their rhythm uneven but alive. The fog was lifting. On every public screen, workers were dismantling old filter grids and sealing vents by hand. People were breathing unfiltered air for the first time in years, coughing, laughing, crying. Neely turned to the window. "Listen," she whispered. Cade did. Through the hum of the machines, through the soft hiss of the wind, came the sound of something new, life, messy and imperfect, filling the silence that had ruled for too long. Cade looked at her, and at the child leaning against her side. "You'll both need somewhere safer," he said. "They'll come after anyone tied to this." Neely shook her head. "We're not running anymore. We've been running all our lives. Then what will you do?" She smiled faintly, watching the light shift across the glass. "We'll breathe." Cade nodded slowly, almost to himself. The air outside shimmered with the rising sun, the mist parting to reveal the endless ocean beneath. The city floated above it, scarred, damaged, but still holding. He watched as a single maintenance drone drifted past the window, its sensors blinking green. A sign of stability, maybe even hope. For the first time, he let himself believe that survival wasn't the same as silence. He leaned against the frame, eyes closing, and took one long, unbroken breath. It hurt a little going down sharp, alive, human. When he opened his eyes again, the city was still there, fragile and breathing, and so was he.